We knew that if this could be built, this is a multi-billion-dollar idea.
How does a Wharton MBA leave Wall Street for Sesame Street and then walk out of the Shark Tank with a $500,000 investment from Mark Cuban to take on a $250 billion industry? In a word, vision.
I would look at these people and be like, if these guys could found a company, I could found a company. And one day I could ring that NASDAQ bell.
In 2017, Caroline Stralka and her co-founder figured out a way to turn any personal video into a game.
I was like, oh my God, Dan, if you could build that and we could patent it, that is the goose that laid the golden egg.
So they left Elmo and founded Overplay. Overplay has over 250,000 downloads, 1.5 million game sessions, and over 4 million minutes already played. And in this episode, she teaches you the blueprint for a non-traditional tech startup to thrive without any marketing. Kind of.
I mean, yes, we were on Shark Tank. Okay.
5 years from now, when you see Overplay IPO at a $10 billion valuation, you can say you found them here on Nikonomics. You don't want to miss this one. Enjoy. Love you guys.
I'm Caroline Stralka. I am the founder of Overplay, the no-code solution for making any video into a game. The way I like to describe it to people is that we're like TikTok for gaming. You're just scrolling through mini games that are made from videos that anyone can make and anyone can play. And these are tapping, swiping, jumping, driving games. And it's awesome. It's what's next for social media.
Give me just a quick example. Let's say I have a video on my phone.
Sure.
What kind of a video would I use to turn into a game?
Yeah. So maybe you went to a Taylor Swift concert. There's this like really great video of Taylor dancing on the stage. And now you can make her dance into like a swiping game. If you think about Dance Dance Revolution or Guitar Hero, the goal of those games is to match the action you see on the screen. Now with your thumb, you're having to swipe, swipe, swipe as Taylor's dancing. And if you're doing it accurately, you're getting points now based on how accurately you're putting in the input, and you're getting rewards. And then there's a leaderboard at the end and everything too. So now, yeah, you could take literally a video of anything and make it into a game.
That is awesome.
Maybe your dog is running around the park and jumping over logs, and now you can make that into a tapping game. Or maybe you're using your GoPro and you are recording a mountain biking trail that you're going down, and now you can make it a POV driving game, you know? So literally anything can now be made into a game, and you could do this within minutes.
You have had a really cool run over the last little bit. You obviously started this company. You've raised a couple of different rounds. You're currently raising a round on WeFunder. Mark Cuban has invested. You've been on Shark Tank. What was it about this business that attracted you to it? And why do you think it's resonating so well with people?
Sure. Yeah. It's one of these things where my co-founder, I've known my co-founder for now like 16 years or something like this. We worked together at Sesame Street, and his name is Dan Perdansky. And one day Dan told me about this idea of how he thinks that he came up with a way to turn any video into a game. And automatically, like, my business development hat went on. And I was like, oh my God, Dan, if you could build that and we could patent it, that is like the goose that laid the golden egg. Coming from the media industry where it costs so much money to film content, it costs a lot to film live action Muppets, as you might have thought about or not, but it costs a lot of money. And so we're always trying to create a long tail for that content. Can that video be used in an app, or can it be used in an ebook or something like this? We're always trying to make that content go further. And to make games is really expensive. Even the easiest game that Sesame was making for apps or whatever, it was like $25,000 to make.
Just to make the game?
Yeah. I mean, it's probably gotten more expensive since then. And so, I was like, oh my gosh, if video could be used as the asset that you then are putting the layer of gaming on top of, that solves so many problems, because you're taking the most expensive parts of making a game out, right? You're taking out the asset creation, the engineering that all has to go behind it. And these are snackable games. So these are like 30 to 45-second games. They're games that you're getting that quick, hit of, maybe it's just fun, or maybe it's educational, or whatever it is, but that might just do the trick for what you're making. So these are not AAA title games with, that cost millions of dollars. These are really easy to make games. Yeah.
So on top of that, the gaming industry is massive, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's more than a $500 billion a year industry.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Gaming is like the biggest form of media out there, and it's growing exponentially every year. the stats around the amount of people that play games every day. It's like now it's like the majority of Americans. And if you think about games, people are playing casual games. You're on the subway, you're playing a game. My head of games calls them toilet games. You're in the bathroom, you're playing a game. We don't like to admit it. And then people are also playing the AAA title 60-hour plus games where you're, completing the multi-level like Madden, where you're playing on a console system on Xbox or whatever.
What I find interesting is like there's kind of two paths into entrepreneurship. I mean, there's lots of paths into entrepreneurship, but I think there's two differentiators into entrepreneurship. There's the regular sweaty startups, just any business that you could go into and start. And then there are tech startups or venture-backed startups. And those are the ones where you have to go out and raise money. The former, it may take a year or two for you to get to a place where you're consistently profitable, but you can bootstrap that business. The latter, it may be a 10-year or even 20-year horizon before you're like really seeing the fruits of your labor. I'm curious, this industry is so big. You found a way to do it cheaper than most other gaming companies. Why did you decide to raise, and why not go the bootstrap route?
Yeah, with this, it's very, very difficult to go the bootstrap route. This is software that we were making something that's never been built before. So we really did need a team of engineers to make both the game maker and the game player. And we built this both for iOS and Android. So this takes a lot of money. This is not one of those things where you can like kind of piecemeal it, release it, charge people money for it. It's not one of those businesses where you have to kind of go whole hog, hire the engineers. I mean, this automatically costs hundreds of thousands of dollars even to get going.
You're getting into entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And how did you even get the idea? Obviously, you're working at Sesame Street. How did you get the idea to say, all right, let's spin this out into a real company?
Yeah. So what actually ended up happening is that, Dan and I, we kept our day jobs, and Dan had this nugget of an idea. We were able to, through another entrepreneur friend of ours, find a developer actually in Argentina who was also willing to work nights and weekends to help us see whether this could even be built, right? So Dan had this idea of how to now a brand new way to make games on top of video. And we didn't even know whether it was possible, right? So we're trying to build the MVP, the minimum viable product. So a lot had to be worked out. And between him and Dan, they were actually able to come up with the MVP. From that, we were able to share the MVP with a lawyer who was then able to see how big this could be, right? And we're able to get the patent for this,
A
right?
lawyer?
So
Why a lawyer?
to get the patent.
Okay. So
Yeah,
sorry. So
yeah.
he wasn't like telling you, hey, you should go raise money for this. He was saying,
No.
this is or is not patentable.
We knew that if this could be built, this is a multi-billion-dollar idea. This is worth a lot of money.
All right, now's the part of the show where I feel the most uncomfortable, but my therapist says I need to face my fears. So here we are. I've started a newsletter and I want you to subscribe. And what you're going to get every single week are the aggregated conversations from that week that I have on this podcast with an overview of what their business actually looks like. I'm also going to throw in a review of one or two businesses that are listed for sale. I'll give you my opinion on whether or not the EBITDA multiple is good, or there's customer concentration, or there's red flags or green flags. And then lastly, I'm going to give you one piece of actionable advice every single week on how to buy your first business. So click the link below, subscribe to my newsletter, and let's get back into the show.
And when you're thinking that way, you know that you have to go the venture-backed route. There is no bank that's going to lend you the millions of dollars that you need for this. Like we are, pre-revenue, we're still pre-revenue. And so this is not a traditionally bankable idea. Like when you have something, especially in the software space, that's highly scalable and that could be huge. You want to have $1 billion idea. If it check marks those boxes, then you have a venture backable idea. And sometimes with ideas like this, you can only really go down the venture route because this is like one of those things where they have to believe in the future of what the software could produce in terms of revenue. And banks don't believe in you at that stage. Yeah.
What's Dan's background? I know he worked at Sesame Street, but what was his?
So Dan actually studied film in college. So he's not a traditionally trained computer scientist. He studied film. He started off at Sesame kind of more on the video side for Sesame. and ended up being a self-taught engineer and ended up becoming the head of interactive at Sesame and running that whole team. So he's just one of these brilliant guys, but it was film. It was film. What really is the thing that really helped him it was his film background that really gave him the other way of thinking about making games that is not the traditional way, right? It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
What I think is fascinating about many of these ideas is there's like always an element of serendipity to them. The companies that make it really big or have industry changing technology that they roll out. And, his experience obviously being at Sesame Street and being in the position to understand their IP catalog as well as how interactivity works. But your background, I mean, you went to University of Penn undergrad and Wharton MBA. You're freaking smart and you do have really good experience. And somehow you both end up at Sesame Street,
Yeah.
which is it's not a place that people think of when they think of like Wharton MBA, right? And then you find this idea that both of you get excited about, and obviously you start a company. Was your intention always to be an entrepreneur, or did this just kind of come about and it was like you guys looked at each other and were like, yeah, we'd be idiots not to run after this idea?
After undergrad, I was an investment banker and I used to take companies public. And one of my companies that I helped to take public was GameStop. And this was, back in the day. So
What year?
uh, this would have been, we took GameStop public in 2001.
Okay.
2001. Yeah.
So this is way before. This is when they were actually, a profitable, making sense
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
invest in company, not a meme stock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, at the bank, I was like one of only a few women on my team. I think there was a group of 100. I was one of 3 women. And I had to get these founders of GameStop. So imagine like, founders of a gaming company or a gaming retail company that kind of in a way fell into success. I mean, they worked very hard, but, clearly also, they came in, they're rough around the edges and I had to clean them up for their roadshow basically, right? Like with the presentation and the business and get them ready. And I looked at all these other companies that, I was working in equity capital markets. And so I would take all these companies public and I would look at these founders, and sometimes these founders, they were the original founders. And sometimes they were the founders or they were the management that came in later after the founders. But I would look at these people and be like, you know what? I could do that someday. Like I could found a company. If these guys could found a company, I could found a company. And one day I could ring that NASDAQ bell for my company. And in a way, being a banker, that seed was already planted in my head that I was like, if these guys could do it, I could do it too. There's nothing stopping me from doing this. So I went to business school. I knew that I didn't want to go back into banking. I already had done my stint there. I did not, I mean, the way that you learn about Wall Street is by working on Wall Street. And I kind of feel like I learned a lot. And I was also working like 100-hour weeks for like 3 years. It was crazy. And so went to business school, studied marketing and entrepreneurial management. And I was really intrigued by both and Wharton's in that area. And entrepreneurial management, it kind of gives you like the scaffolding around which you could kind of think about starting a company. And so I had it in my mind that I didn't know that I would start a company. I never thought I would start a company like right after business school, which is not what I did anyway. But I always had in the back of my mind that, yeah, maybe I could start something. And at least Wharton would give me the good scaffolding to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to hear you start telling the pieces because I always feel like when you get into entrepreneurship, whatever your first foray into entrepreneurship is, I'm a very risk averse person. So I think go into the thing that has the least risky profile to it. And I tell people, look at your subset of experiences, look at your skill set, find a business that matches that and kind of build around that. The easiest thing to do normally is like start an agency business. Maybe you're a CPA and you start a practice. Maybe you are an engineer and coder, start doing freelance work, etc. But, do something that you have a special skill set in. And so just hearing you start talking about the little nuggets that you were developing over time is incredible. The roadshow, like that is not something a lot of people go through. Like road shows are hardcore because you are literally going around to institutional investors and pitching your company, and they're asking you very hard questions. You have to be prepared to not just answer the surface level questions, but the second, third, fourth order questions because they're putting a lot of money and capital behind you. And so to hear you like preparing for that and understanding what is needed in those pitches, there's like one skill that's being developed. Then you go over to Sesame Street and you're like, this makes sense. Well, before Sesame Street, you go to get your MBA in marketing and entrepreneurial management. Then you go to Sesame Street and you start learning about content. You meet somebody there. And then like all these pieces kind of come together where with Overplay, it's a no-brainer to invest in Caroline at this point because it's like, yeah, she has all of these experiences. Did you think about it like that at the time? Or is it only in retrospect that you're able to say, yeah, it did kind of work that way?
I think I see my life in a different way. I think I see my life as pretty fluid. And I like to, one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got is to put yourself in challenging situations. And I will tell you, being an investment banker right after undergrad, it's like being thrown in the fire, right? Like it was super challenging, but I knew that I would come out, like if I kept my eyes and ears open, like I'd either come out, knowing people that would be useful in the future for me or with an idea or something like that. And then going into Wharton for my MBA, I kind of came in a little bit open, knowing that I was like, I don't need to study finance. I've already done that. And let me see what else is out there. And so I was like exploring a variety of classes and I was like, I just had that feeling in the back of my mind that entrepreneurship would be there. And then, I took the job at Sesame after MBA, which is not normal for Wharton MBA to go into a nonprofit. It was really interesting because I kind of, once again, kept my options open. I didn't want to go into management consulting because I actually like making stuff that actually, like, I felt like management consulting was a lot of like, writing up decks for a client that end up never being implemented. I wanted the work that I did to somehow be useful to the world. Like I wanted to make stuff. I get a lot of pride in being able to make something. But yet I'm not an engineer. Right. And so Sesame was an interesting opportunity because they were looking to bring on some business people to really help with various areas of the business, especially around building the digital media business, which was just starting off. If you think about the iPods and like
Yeah.
iPads and how kids,
What year was this?
inter
2008?
yeah. So I started working at Sesame in 2006. And then I was there for 7 years.
Wow. Okay. You were there a long time. It wasn't like you were just there 2 years, found a
No,
cool idea and bounced.
no, I was there for a long time. And, I was working investment banking hours over there as well, but we were making really cool stuff. So Sesame's very first apps, console games, all the deals with Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, those platforms were just getting started and everyone wanted to work with Sesame because it's like,
You were negotiating like licensing deals. You were doing the business development side of things.
yeah, licensing deals, but also thinking through the content, like what could be made from this, but then also like going over and flying out to San Francisco and working with IDEO's Toy Lab in creating Sesame's very first app. So like rapid prototyping and everything like that.
Wow.
When you're at a nonprofit, you're doing like everything. So yes, my title was business development, but I was also like, kind of creative and, marketing or everything.
You have like the perfect profile to invest in. You're so smart, but you have very specific experience in a niche space.
Yes.
Anyways, like that is, I just think that's so freaking cool.
Thank you.
When did you, in that kind of run up, when did you decide like Overplay was the thing you wanted to do? Was it 2015 and it was like a 3-month period of time where you're like, oh, yep, this is it, we're out? Or was it kind of a slower process that took a few years to unfurl before you and Dan decided to make the step?
Yeah. So what had happened is that prior to COVID, so Dan and I had kept in touch. Dan and I are totally yin and yang though. So he's kind of
Okay.
like, he's like the mad scientist kind of guy, like the brilliant engineer, and then I'm like more like on the business side, but also like pretty creative and strategic. So Dan and I, we would meet up for coffee like once a month, early in the morning, and just talk about our ideas because we always had stuff buzzing on the side that we were working on. And so it was one day we were meeting up for coffee at my local coffee shop here, and Dan tells me about Overplay. And so I literally told him, I was like, if you could build that MVP and we could patent it, I'm in. And so what ended up happening is that during COVID, I was actually down in Florida with my parents and kind of doing the COVID thing. and working
Oh
from
my,
down there.
hold on a second. So you were living in New York, but then you were in Florida?
Yes, so I moved down to actually right before New York was closed down for COVID, I was down in Florida for my nephew's first birthday, and they ended up closing New York, and I never came back.
That is so funny because I was in California for the very beginning of COVID. And then I moved to Idaho in like May. And
Yeah,
so you probably had the same experience. Like California was like, dude, anybody within a quarter mile gets COVID, we're all going to die,
yeah,
shut everything down. Like it's the
yeah,
worst thing, put 17 masks on. Then
yep,
you come to Idaho and it's like, COVID
yeah,
don't exist. That's a
yeah.
conspiracy theory. Like just totally opposite ends of the spectrum. And that's New York and Florida too.
Yeah, that was New York and Florida, but it's nice, my parents, luckily, lucky me, they live right on the beach, and so it was really the best place. We could actually stay away from other people and be in a
Yeah.
beautiful natural setting, and I was helping take care of my parents and keeping them safe too, which was really important because coming from the north, I was already, by the way, wearing masks up here because I listened to the BBC and I had heard a report about virus coming out of China. And this was weeks before I went down, weeks before any of this was called, I was already wearing a mask. And so I came down, with that knowledge that, but I didn't think anything would be closed down. Like I didn't think I didn't go back to New York for like 18 months.
That is
So
insane.
it was cool. I hung out at the beach. I worked on my
Yeah,
business,
there's freaking worse places to be than on the beach.
Exactly.
So you spent that time during COVID to kind of take the opportunity to start working on Overplay.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And not
Hmm.
only did we start working on Overplay, we started raising money for Overplay.
But let me ask you this, because this is where I think most entrepreneurs are going to identify with you, where it's like, hey, cool, I met somebody else. We have a cool idea. Let's partner together and do something and work on it. But this is where the divergence starts. You are sitting there thinking, I need to go raise, if we're going to make this work, I got to raise money because this is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop. And most entrepreneurs don't even enter this space. So I think this would be a fun conversation to get into some of the details. When did you start realizing you needed to raise money for this? Was it right away?
Right away. Even when Dan first told me about the idea, I had it in the back of my mind that, like, is this a good time to fundraise for this? I mean, there's all sorts of things you have to think about strategically, given the industry, right? And so it ended up being also too that gaming and media, it was a good time,
Great
to
time.
raise for that. And so we're talking about in 2020. Yeah.
How did you know that first initial round? Because I think you said there's been 3 rounds so far. So that first friends and family round, how
Mhm.
much did you raise, and how did you get to that number?
So this is also one of those things you have to think about very strategically. And you can't raise too little that people don't take you seriously. And you can't raise too much that you're selling too much of your company early on, right? So no matter what you do, if you decide to raise a round of funding, pre-seed round of funding, or a couple pre-seed rounds like what we did, raise it as a safe, not even a convertible note. Raise it as it's a safe is kind of like a convertible note, but it's a little bit more founder friendly. But this is the Combinator created instrument that came out like 15 years ago. It is really the best thing to raise off of. And so there's some standard terms that you usually use. So I had it in my mind that we needed to raise $1.5 million. And the way that I got to 1.5 million is because I was like, you know what? We need $1 million, but we're probably going to need that $500,000 buffer for this unknowns, right? This might end up taking, no matter what you start, it ends up taking much more time and much more money than you think.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it ends up taking 3 times more time and 3 times more money than you think, even if you're being, adding in the buffer. So I was like, you know what? Let's raise 1.5 million and let's do it on some standard terms, right? So usually standard terms, especially you can look at the industry, think about the safe that you're raising. You're like, well, let's raise it at 8 or 8.5 million post money cap, and let's do it at a 15% discount. These are like standard terms. Yeah.
Break that down for people who are listening. You may be thinking, I'm speaking to the audience now. You may be thinking, oh my gosh, if I went and raised money, I'd have to then figure out the valuation as well. So if she raised $1.5 million, like what's the valuation and what percentage equity, all that stuff. What a safe does essentially is it says, I'm raising $1.5 million and when I raise the next round or when there's a priced round, you will have and you said 15% discount at whatever we raise at. And there's an $8 million cap. So if we end up raising at a $10 million valuation, your equity piece is calculated at that $8 million cap. So
Yeah, you get the better of the, yeah.
Yeah, you have more upside to it. So you're not giving away equity up front in these pre-seed rounds. You're doing the safe, which sits there. The company's able to use it, and then it converts to equity once there's a priced round in the future.
That's right. Your cap is serving as like a proxy for your valuation, but it's not the actual valuation yet. And it doesn't become an actual valuation until you raise your first price round, which, by the way, we have not yet raised a price round. We've raised only on.
And what does that mean, a price round?
A price round is really when you're when you're really you're doling out the equity. So you're coming in with a specific price. All of the money has to close on a certain date. You're doling out the equity, actual ownership in the company, and all the safes or convertible notes are now converting at that date.
Did you know all of this stuff at the time, or did you have to go and like, all right, I guess I'm going to go read all of Paul Graham's essays and, all the Y Combinator, because like Y Combinator puts out a ton of information, and like, okay, I need to incorporate in Delaware because that's what they say. And then it needs to be a C Corp because walk me through your process for getting up to speed on the structure for a venture-backed company.
So just to lay it out, right after undergrad, I worked in equity capital markets. I used to price convertible notes, so like
Sure.
I understood, what a cap was, what a discount was. Convertible notes are complicated, like super complicated, but the general concept of convertible notes, even for large companies, like I understood what that was. And then when I started taking my entrepreneurship classes at Wharton, and I was like, oh yeah, you can raise now convertible notes, for a startup. Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, that makes sense. And converts were still the thing. Safes came a little bit later, but if you kind of keep up on the, on entrepreneurship, like, yes, you do, you hear about Techstars, you hear about Y Combinator. If you're kind of up and up on that, there's a lot written about them, right? So you can kind of read a lot about it. So I would read about safes, and I knew that safe was the right way to structure this. Yeah. There's a lot of podcasts too on this.
There are. Yeah. No, there's a ton of YouTube, and there's a ton of different types of safes. Like you can do it a bunch of different ways.
There's really only two kinds of safes, by the way. There's a pre-money and post-money. You just want to use the standard safe that's on the Y Combinator website.
You can augment the safe with a bunch of different terms that you throw in there, is what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, you can augment the safe, but you're only changing the first piece. But I one of the reasons I'm kind of like honing in on that is that the safe is the safe, and it's like the whole idea behind it is that it's so easy and it should not be changed other than for you changing the cap and the discount. Like you really are not supposed to change other terms. And that's what makes it so easy for investors to come in and for founders to raise off of a safe.
So if anybody was raising pre-seed or seed, you recommend going the safe route?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Convertible notes are still too complicated. There's still too much negotiation. You want to make it as easy as possible. Also, you don't want to spend a lot of money on lawyers or in this early stage. You don't want to be changing your terms for this one investor and that one investor, whatever. It makes your cap table super messy. You have lots of side letters. No. Make it as easy as humanly possible from the beginning. Just raise us a safe.
How did you go about deciding what you would pay yourself? Because that's always been something. I've never done a venture-backed company, but it's always been something I've been curious about, because like you get into entrepreneurship because you want control and you want to make money and you want to do your own thing. But when you've got a venture-backed company, it could be 10 years before you go public and have a liquidity event. And maybe there are some opportunities to take secondary along the way, but your salary in particular, like how is that set? And how did you decide on that in that first kind of go around?
Yeah. So I think we began paying ourselves in the second round of funding. So we raised $1.5 million, and then we raised a second round of funding, $3 million round. And we started paying ourselves at that point. The reason for it is because if you're going full time on your startup, you have to pay yourself because you have to live somewhere and you have to eat. And so Dan and I, talked about it. It's expensive to live in New York, but we're the only folks who in our company, we're the only folks who do live in New York. Most of our team is global. A lot of folks in Latin America and Europe. And so, but Dan and I, we're like, okay, here's what I think we're going to need to pay ourselves just to be able to live, and here's also what's acceptable for us, but also our investors also expect us to pay ourselves, because if you're not paying yourself, you can't work full time at your idea, like you have to have your side hustle or whatever. And so investors really want you to be focused on on your company. And so you absolutely do need to pay yourself. It might not be with your first round of funding. It was not for ours, but we did need to do it for our second round. We were not
So
able.
what was the time period between the first round and second round of funding?
We raised our first round in 2021, and we raised our second round last year.
That's 2 years. What did you do for 2 years to make ends meet?
Yeah, we did raise as a safe. So if you can, once again, if you can raise as a safe, you're collecting checks and you're able to spend as they come in. So even though we closed our last round in 2023, I believe we started paying ourselves in 2022.
Where did the majority of the money go? Was it all development costs?
Yeah, it's mostly product focused. So we were building both for iOS and Android, a game player and a game maker, and we're building in native code. So we have 20 people currently on our team. It is still mostly product focused at this point. I mean, we do have some QA, some research ahead of design, but yeah, it's mostly engineering. But now, as we raise this next round of funding, which a lot of it is still going to go towards engineering to build our API, but we are going to bring on like some business folks to help us out on the marketing side and other places. Yeah.
How do you think about equity like that? That would always, I know the safes are good because they give you flexibility, but when you finally do convert, what should be a goal of a founder? Like, are they like, yeah, I'm still owning 80%, me and my co-founder own 80%, or
Oh gosh.
is it more than that?
Yeah. So the rule of thumb. So in general, this is just rules of thumb. With every round of funding that you raise, expect to sell off anywhere between 15 to 20% of your company. And as you think that through, also, what you also want to do is that with every round of funding, you're hoping to double your valuation, right? If we raised at an $8 million post money cap, our first round of funding, our second round of funding, we raised at a 15 million post money cap. And now, say, for instance, we're raising at a 30 million post money cap. So that way, every time you're selling off, yes, a certain percentage of your company, but you're doing it at increasingly higher valuations. And in general, this is like the rule of thumb, but you want to be hitting those milestones to be able to now justify the much higher valuation from raise to raise. So all of those milestones that you're telling your investors that you're going to hit before the next round, you want to make sure you hit them. So that way you can, justify your next level of valuation.
And you've done some pretty interesting things with raising money. You've gone institutional, you've done the friends and family, but you've also raised on these fundraising platforms.
Yep.
Tell me why.
What's that? I'm sorry.
I said, to quote the Backstreet Boys, tell me why.
Tell me why.
Yes.
Ain't nothing but it's not a heartache of raising on WeFunder. So WeFunder. We decided, so there's 3 equity crowdfunding platforms, and this is different than regular crowdfunding. This is not you raising money for surgery for your dog. This is equity crowdfunding it is raising from the crowd in exchange for future equity for your company, right? So what happens is that there's 3 platforms that you could raise from. We raised on WeFunder. There's also Start Engine and Republic. Those are the 3. And they're all a little bit different from each other, but essentially they all end up doing the same thing, which is put together an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, where you're able to aggregate a lot of investments, and they could be $100 all the way up to $100,000, that whatever people would want to put into your company, but it's all aggregated as one SPV and ends up being one line item on the founder's cap table. And you raise it as a crowd safe. And so
it is a safe. It's not a convertible note.
Yeah, I'm telling you, safe is the way to go. And so we decided to raise our second round of funding, which was last year, and to raise it so we raised half of it. We raised a $3 million round in total. We raised 1.5 of it from institutional, venture capitalists, angels, all of that, and 1.5 million of it from WeFunder. And we figured, you know what, we're democratizing gaming and WeFunder is democratizing investment. Might as well, bring normal people in to be able to invest in Overplay.
Well, it's interesting because there is a perception of people who raise on these crowd-funded sites that either A, venture capital, they couldn't raise money anywhere else, so they've got to go raise from a bunch of uneducated investors. Or B, if they do raise, it's going to make it more difficult for venture to come in and invest because it muddies the cap table. So how, you kind of just explained the first, which I like and agree with. How do you respond to the second one where maybe VC shies away because they're on the cap table now?
It doesn't muddy the cap table at all. So because it's one line item, it's one special purpose vehicle. It's kind of funny when we first started raising on WeFunder, Dan and I always we're normal people. I grew up in Philly. Dan grew up in New York, but in New York in the 70s, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
In the 80s. I mean, I grew up in
Giuliani, New York.
Yeah, we're normal people. We're people that worked really hard to get to wherever we were, but we're normal middle class kids who middle class city kids. I grew up in a row home, we wanted to be able to almost bring, we wanted to bring Overplay to the people. We wanted normal people to ride this kind of spaceship with us. We're a rocket ship. We wanted to bring people along for the ride. Dan and I always had it in our minds that we wanted to bring people like us on the journey with us. And we told our investors this. So we had some institutional investors who actually didn't know anything about equity crowdfunding. And they're like, why are you doing this? And I was like, because we can. And at the end of the day, you just need to bring in your money quickly. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter. You want to keep your cap table clean. So what I mean by clean is that you don't want 1,000 line items on the cap table. But if you have a couple of them too, that's fine. Ain't nobody going to say boo about it. We move forward anyway. Even if a VC complained about us doing that, be like, okay, well then you either reinvest in us or invest more in us. So that way we don't go that route, But yeah, we figured we just could. And I'm very glad that we made that decision because there's ancillary benefits to raising equity crowdfunding as well. Not just the money that comes in, and it's not uneducated folks who are coming in, which I kind of take a little bit of offense to, because that is the way that, by the way, people think about retail investors, wrongly. I mean, we have a lot of we have people who are investing for the first time. Absolutely. They're just getting their feet wet on investing. And I love that so much. There's even classes. There's undergrad classes where you have to invest in a company and you learn about venture capital by investing through WeFunder, which is awesome. But then also too, there's LPs who are invested in major funds, or there's angels who come in, big time angels who just snoop around on Start Engine and WeFunder looking at the best new ideas, right? And so it's kind of you're almost able to be like a shark on Shark Tank. You can figure out who's the winner here.
That's how you got on a Shark Tank, right? Was somebody who had invested in one of your...
Oh, right. They discovered us on WeFunder. So Shark Tank approached us because they found us on WeFunder. And then also too, we have all these, we're going to be announcing some really big partnerships soon. And some of those partnerships found us through WeFunder.
It's interesting because you say a lot of the things that investors want to hear a founder say. I feel like 99% of the time, it's because the founder has figured out what they want to hear and then worked their way back from it and found a little story to tell that can tie in to what they want to hear. But your experience, you worked 7 years at Sesame Street, and you're a Wharton MBA. You're not just motivated by the same kinds of things. So this is very in line with your brand, I would say. So it's just really cool to hear you talk about it, but also have the history to back up what you're talking about. It's not just lip service.
Yeah. And also Dan and I are very genuine people. We wear our hearts on our sleeves. In all honesty, and it even goes back to a question that you asked a little earlier, which I'm not even sure I answered fully. I don't think I did. We had to think about also too, ownership. One of the things you really do need to think about if you do go down this route where you're raising safes or even, equity or whatever, you really do need to think about how much ownership you retain in your company with every round of funding.
Mhm.
And, and it also has to come at a certain timetable where you're able to achieve what you need to achieve, right? So it's a careful balance of how much you're raising, how much you're selling off, and at what time. And, Dan and I, as we're telling our stories, this is all coming from the heart. Like, this is our baby. Overplay is our baby.
No, it's cool. I mean, talking to you for 10 minutes, you're like, oh, okay, she's genuine. This isn't just like a story she's telling
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Last question on the business, and then I have some rapid fire questions to wrap up. So you're 4 years in, you're just about to start monetizing this year. What do you think the timeline is for you personally to have a liquidity event? And what does the liquidity event look like? Is it a secondary
Yeah.
or is it going public? Like, what are your intentions?
I do think that within a year's time, Overplay is going to get offers to be bought. Like, and that could be from, it's always like putting my investment banker hat back on. This could be from a public company that's in the social media space or in the media space, and they need to constantly show growth for investors. And so it could be a public company that is looking to round out by adding in gaming or by adding in, you
Like
know,
when Facebook bought Zynga, or was it Ben? I can't remember who the company was, Farmville and all that stuff.
oh yeah, right, right, exactly. Or when they bought Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Or like, Adobe putting in the offer to buy Figma for
Mm,
$20 billion last year,
yeah.
right? There's various reasons why folks might be interested in Overplay. And it could be a media company, but it also could be a creator economy company, it could be a platform. And there could be a bunch of interesting opportunities there. But I also do think Overplay has enough legs to potentially go public. And the reason why I believe that as well is because Overplay, yes, we have our app, but we are also building the API. And the API would allow our technology to be wrapped and inserted into other websites and apps. So, for instance, ESPN.com could integrate the Overplay API and now make game playable highlights reels, and they'll be playable on ESPN.com, And that's the kind of thing where we believe Overplay could be ubiquitous. I don't think that the timeline, it's too long before we could, do something.
I'm trying to give somebody an idea who's like listening to this, like, man, 4 years in, and
Yeah.
maybe she's making a salary, but to not have any liquidity event for putting that much work in is hard. Like, when could there be an expectation? So you think in the
We
next
do,
few years would
yeah, we
be.
do think 3 to 5 years time. Yeah.
Last question. What's currently the biggest bottleneck to growth? Is it getting users to adopt it? Is it engineering? Where do you see growth stalling currently? Not stalling, but just the bottleneck.
I'm glad that I can say this because this is like an easy solve, but it is the money right now to be able to hire the folks to build the API. So we're raising a round of funding. I feel like funding is always the bottleneck.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of interest in Overplay on the investor side, which is really great. But yeah, we're raising a $5 million round right now. We've raised 1.3 million on WeFunder so far. We're in due diligence with some funds that are coming pretty close. So I think that we'll be able to wrap up this round pretty soon. But yeah, right now it's about like being able to, hire the API engineers to like now be able to move things forward. So
How many daily active users? I guess, how do you measure the app itself?
yeah, yeah. So we just released our beta in June, and we had to create our own tables on the back end to be able to measure all of this stuff, because this is not something that you can normally measure through like regular Google
Yeah.
Analytics or the app analytics and things like that. We had to measure other things. So we had to build that whole dashboard and everything too. So we needed a few months. So we just launched the beta in June. We needed a few months. We're going to be releasing to strategic investors our usage. But right now we have over 250,000 downloads. We have over 1.5 million gameplays, over 4 million minutes already played on Overplay. And yeah, and this is without any marketing, really. I mean, yes, we
Yeah.
were on Shark Tank. Okay, we were on Shark Tank. I do give that, but we're not like, actively marketing
Pushing it.
Overplay yet. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Here's some rapid fire questions to end it. You ready?
Sure.
What do you love about this business?
I just love bringing something new out into the world that'll help people discover new something new creatively about themselves. This is a tool now where anyone could be a game maker. And I think most adults have never made their own games. Most adults have filmed videos and shared it with their friends, but now they can add an interactivity portion on top of it to make it even more fun. And I just love this new creativity tool. Yeah.
What do you hate about it?
What do I hate about this business?
Not the business, like it could be the process of fundraising. It could
The
be,
process,
the
yeah.
business.
It
It
is
could
it
be,
is a very it is a very long process for fundraising. It's a time suck. And I
yeah,
really want to get back into the business of Overplay rather than just fundraising. I would love to have my time back.
dude, I totally agree.
Yeah.
All right. If you have 2 hours in your day and there's no work responsibilities and no personal family responsibilities, what are you obsessed with right now? What's taking up mind share?
I just want to be outside. I just want to be with the trees. I just want to be outside in the sun with the trees and with nature. I know I live in New York, so it's a little bit of a hard thing to do, but I am actually going to be planting my front stoop. We have a like a nice tree and an area around the tree. So I'm like, I just actually bought a ton of plants that I'm going to be planting
Awesome.
Harlem, it's just like,
Well, a
um,
tree does grow in Harlem. So
a tree does grow. Actually, a crazy
Brooklyn.
thing on 311, you can request a tree like anywhere if you're in the city. And I think I've planted over 300 trees in New York at this point.
Oh, awesome. That's very freaking cool. All right.
So, yeah,
Lastly, what advice would you give to your pre-entrepreneurial self?
like buckle in. I mean, it's blood, sweat, and tears, and it's gonna be worthwhile. But I'm not saying it's not gonna be painful. It's been one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most painful things I've ever done in my life. Like the people that you think are gonna, your friends who you think are gonna support you in this process, or even your partner, they might not be there for you for this journey. Like they might bail.
Yeah.
And yet strangers and other people that you meet through the community that you're trying to create might end up being your biggest advocates. And that's one of the things that I find that's most shocking in life. I just had this conversation with another startup friend yesterday. But yeah, it's like the people that you think are going to be in your journey with you are not necessarily the ones that are going to join you for this. And you have to, if you decide to go down this path, it is your path and you have to take responsibility for it. And it's going to be different than you think it will be.
Going to be different than you think it will be. That is
Yeah.
truer words have never been spoken.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Thank you for coming on, being candid, sharing as much as you have. Where is the best place for people to come find you? Where's the best place for
Yeah.
people to find, download, and play with Overplay?
Overplay, yeah. Come to overplay.com. You could download Overplay for free. It takes you right to the Android and to the iOS page. You could download the app, try it out, try making a game. You could also invest in Overplay if you wanted to. We still have our WeFunder open. So that's wefunder.com/overplay. And if you wanted to reach me, I'm at Reach Me or Dan. We're at founders@overplay.com.
Caroline's story is pretty incredible, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with Brandon Arvanaghi. He founded a fintech company called Meow. They have over $2 billion of assets on their platform, and he did it the non-traditional way. If you're interested in hearing that conversation with Brandon, it's episode 17. You can check it out on Apple or Spotify podcasts, or you can click here if you're on YouTube, and you'll go straight to that video. Just an incredible story where he talks about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, him being at the center of that, also crypto and transitioning from crypto into a fintech company. Anyways, it's a really good one. You want to check it out. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.